Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this exciting event. And I'm only sorry that this year we can't actually do it in person, but looking forward to next year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about technology and the future of education, and really looking at the rapid move to online and blended learning and what impact this has had on education and what could be the longer term impact of all the changes that we've seen over COVID. There's been talk of virtual classrooms and remote teaching being the future of education since I began my teaching career. However, the pace of change has been slow, and what changes have occurred have usually just been around the edges. I remember my first whiteboard and projector, and it seemed incredibly high tech and a big step into the modern way of teaching. The children were excited by the novelty and the ability to come to the front and move things around. There were interactive games, access to the internet, sounds and music on tap, literally bells and whistles everywhere. However, while it certainly introduced more flexibility in presentation, it didn't actually change how the children learned, or really how I taught them. The teacher still stood at the front of the class, the children were still at desks working in their books. Different styles and approaches to teaching came in and out of favour, but none of them were primarily driven by technology. On the whole, bums have remained on seats and the teacher has stayed in the classroom delivering, as the current terminology has it, the lesson. In universities, perhaps even less has changed. The lecturer now uses a PowerPoint presentation to accompany their talk instead of an overhead projector. Those of you who don't quite understand what that means, I'd say look it up on your phone, kids. And that's about it. But then COVID lockdown arrived. Not only did the classroom-based lessons disappear, individual schools, colleges and universities had to suddenly devise their own responses to pupils and students learning at home. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the unexpected nature of this pandemic, this hadn't yet led to a revolutionary new approaches to teaching and learning through new technologies. But it has certainly been a crash course in what is possible right now, and has made us think about what is important and what is not. So what have we learned? An international survey of teachers of their experiences and insights from having to teach remotely during this pandemic was interesting reading, and the summary of their recommendations gave food for thought. One big take home from me was how disadvantage, in all its forms, is magnified by remote learning. There was a clear call for free and universal access to the internet. When reading this in a worldwide report, you might be tempted to think problems with access belong mostly to underdeveloped or underprivileged countries. But I know from my work that this is a real problem in this country too, and indeed in our city. There was an assumption in government certainly, and perhaps more widely, that all young people are plugged into the internet 24/7 and all have the latest devices. And this is very far from the case. A smartphone with a data cap is not a laptop or a PC with unlimited data allowance. Specialist software is not necessarily freely available. Many homes lack broadband, never mind unlimited high-speed broadband, and any household with one computer and more than one person who needs to use it for their learning is running into problems. One group who did recognise connectivity was going to be an issue was JISC, along with the Association of Colleges and Universities UK, who proposed a data plan exemption scheme. Downloads generated by visiting designated educational websites, accessing online learnings for research papers, virtual learning environments, video lectures and so on would be counted as free data on any student's data plan. It was an idea I supported as Shadow Minister for Universities, and one I believe should have been extended to primary and secondary education. Frankly, if free internet access for all is something that simply cannot be considered, then such a scheme should exist outside of a pandemic. Unfortunately, the government were not interested in these proposals. They did, after much pressure and lobbying, agree to provide laptops to the most disadvantaged in schools who are lacking them. However, as we know, this process has dragged out, and it has now, these schools have been sent a revised number of laptops of which they're entitled to. And so many have not received even half of their allocation. And I'm worried that this shows that they don't fully understand the challenge a large section of the country's pupils and students face. Because another point to come out of this international survey that the teachers wanted to stress was that, good as they are, technologies are a tool. Without trained teachers possessing an in-depth subject knowledge and an understanding of how people learn behind them, it doesn't work. There are almost countless ways for a student to fail to grasp an idea or a technique. Part of a teacher's skill lies not in identifying what is not understood, but the how and the why. They can then guide the student to a proper understanding. Because we are social animals and we like to communicate. We explore our understanding of the world, of ourselves, through words and symbols and through the exchanging of ideas. And above all, we interact. There's a tendency of politicians and administrators to imagine knowledge can simply be delivered. There's that word again, delivered as a package, and that the role of teacher is somehow less important with online resources. In fact, it appears that people are even more important when learning online, certainly for primary and secondary students. Parental support was seen as a key factor to successful online education by teachers in the study. This means that regardless of the technology, the playing field is not level. It's common to think about disadvantage in terms of money or the lack of it, to be precise. But in this instance, it can be influenced by other factors, like the amount of spare time a parent has, how many children do they have to share it between, or how familiar they are with the internet technology and using online resources. And the final point from the study I'd like to highlight was the frequent references to the importance of finding ways to maintain and develop opportunities for contact and relationships. Whether that was between students by creating online clubs, or between students and teachers for both educational and pastoral support, or between students and teachers themselves to allow mutual support and create new resources and ideas, which I think points the way to where new technologies in education should be looking. How do we create systems and resources that not only allow but actively encourage the creation of relationships of collaboration and communication? It may be those sorts of things already exist, but I've yet to see them gain a foothold in mainstream education. Something I would certainly want to see incorporated into new technologies is the development of oracy. Oracy simply means the ability to speak, but to do it well, to be able to express your thoughts and feelings clearly and confidently, can boost a whole range of social and emotional and interpersonal skills, including self-confidence, self-awareness, resilience, and empathy. Having the skills and the confidence to speak up and believe in yourself means that you don't have to be sidelines. You can have your say and make sure that your views are heard and understood. This is something I believe is currently overlooked, and why I'm chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Oracy, whose aim is to give equal standing with reading and writing at all ages in all parts of the curriculum. So if oracy is something that should be part of our education of the future, what else should we be considering when designing the technology to help us? What are our skills and knowledge that we will require? Some people's view of the purpose of our education system is that it's there to educate and equip us for the world of work, to adopt a phrase that many use. I feel that is a very narrow and possibly damaging view, but let's suppose it is true for the moment. Even before the pandemic, this world of work was undergoing rapid changes thanks to the speed of technological developments. We are, according to some, in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. The changes to our lives and work caused by coal and steel and mass production in the past are being replaced by those brought in with electronics, information technology, and artificial intelligence. According to the ONS in 2017, 1.5 million people were employed in jobs that were at high risk of automation. 98.8% of these individuals were qualified to level 3, so A-levels and equivalent or below. On the other hand, 87% of people whose jobs that were deemed to be low risk had degree level qualifications. Automation will continue to be a challenge. One estimate by PwC is that 28% of jobs taken by 16 to 24-year-olds today could be at risk of automation by the early 2030s. It would seem then that increasing levels of education in the country would be the best option, and that the ability to retrain at any stage of life will become less of a luxury and more of an absolute necessity. The current redundancies as part of the pandemic and the likelihood that many jobs will never return, but that different ones will be created, suggests to me that a huge challenge facing us in education today will be in reskilling and retraining. Currently, a quarter of jobs in the UK are low skilled, and that comes with low pay. And while I believe that it's the case that people should be protected by a minimum wage that represents a true living wage, by building a higher skilled economy, we build a more prosperous country. Higher wages mean a higher tax take to government, which means more money for public services. Better public services like health, education, social care, and better resource infrastructure means a better standard of living for everyone, regardless of their income. So part-time education will, of course, have an important part to play in both retraining and raising levels of education. Part-time higher learning is more closely associated with low prior qualifications than it is with full-time higher education. In 2017-18, students enrolling onto part-time higher education courses in the UK were 6 times more likely to hold a level 2 qualification or below. Level 2 qualification being a GCSE equivalent, so GCSE equivalent or below. Unfortunately, the number of adults enrolling in part-time higher education has fallen by 70% since 2009-10. And the reasons behind this dramatic decline will need to be urgently addressed if we're going to successfully meet the challenges of COVID, the rapidly changing job market, and achieve a more prosperous nation for a more highly skilled economy. An increase in the number of modular courses available and a proper system of funding to support part-time learning would be a welcome step. And whilst change is coming quickly and inevitably, nobody possessing a fully functioning crystal ball will be certain of the areas in where the new jobs will arise and the others disappear. It's therefore difficult to identify the subject knowledge and the skills required to perfectly fit us for the workplaces of the future. And this is where the concept of education for a job can fall short, even with its own narrow outlook. So let's return to the 80% of people who had jobs deemed to be at low risk of automation. Why is it that those with a degree are at less of a threat? Most degrees are not vocational, so what do they offer that gives us an advantage in the face of increasing automation in a changing workplace? My answer would be squidgy skills. Where hard skills are the knowledge and the technical skills required to obtain a particular degree, and which will be specific to it, squidgy skills contribute to what you might call graduateness. These often lack a clear definition as part of a degree course, but they are recognised to exist, and the development is essential in gaining a good quality degree in any subject. They include, but are not limited to, things like discipline, resilience, independence of thought, initiative, the ability to research and critically evaluate information, organisation and communication. These skills and attributes give a person the flexibility and capacity to adapt to changes and undertake work that still lie beyond the scope of automation and artificial intelligence. At the moment, many of these squidgy skills are left largely to the student to develop themselves, and their assessment lies only in their contribution to the student's overall success. I believe that they should be more specifically recognised and taught, and not just at degree level, at all levels. In a rapidly changing world, they are essential to properly equip our young people to meet the challenge ahead of them. However, these challenges are not going to be limited to the young. I believe the Labour Party's commitment to a right to access lifelong learning for all will prove to be a necessity. In the same way, it is becoming even more obvious that internet access should be treated as a utility service, just as water, gas and electric, as a right, not a privilege. Technology will continue to change what is possible and in ways we cannot predict. However, it cannot change what we fundamentally are as human beings. Whatever comes, I believe that education should improve its focus on how we best develop what is unique to ourselves as humans, that which cannot be easily replaced or simulated, and to regularly remind ourselves that technology is a tool, a powerful one, it is true, but like all tools, one that requires skill and mindful application for the right result. So I'm just going to have a look now in my last remaining couple of minutes and see if there's any questions that have come through on flicking through the different screens. So Adam's made a comment, thank you Adam, and he said, whether it's enterprise or education, the real challenge in the post-pandemic world is not necessarily understanding what needs to change and which digital solutions could help, but the speed at which changes now need to take place and the impact they will have on people. Businesses and institutions that are built to adapt and work with greater agility will be those best placed to deliver more value, people, process and technology. I completely agree with the point that you've made there. It's how do we adapt to the constantly changing world of work? Because we've seen almost a revolution in the use of technology. We've had someone describe it as 5 years change within the space of only a few short months. I mean, all of us were expecting there would be greater use of technology and that this would influence the way that we teach and the way that we learn, but no one expected it to utterly be transformed within, since March. When you look at how universities are offering the blended learning, the online learning mixed with the more traditional ways of educating, there's no reason why some of this won't continue. And when we also look at how people are working now, many more people working from home, many more people accessing remotely, there's huge questions as to Are things going to return to the way they were before, and would we want them to? One of the points, which not in this speech, which I've mentioned before, is my real desire to create social mobility without geographical mobility, for people to be able to prosper in the areas where they live, and not to always have this feeling that you need to move to another part of the country to somehow get on in life. Apologies, just hang up that phone that's calling me. And one of the ways in which this could actually happen is by looking at people being able to work remotely. Why not in the future? Could it not be fairly standard for someone to be living in the city of Hull, employed by a big company in London, but only actually visiting London once a fortnight? I mean, these things that were only dreams before the pandemic now become quite likely. Why couldn't that happen? And thanks, Phil, for yes. Oh, someone made a comment on what's the difference between squidgy skills and soft skills. Is my choice of language. I think when people describe soft skills, they tend to give the impression that somehow they're not strong enough skills. They're not sort of, they're soft, they're a little bit weak. I prefer the term squidgy skills because they're the kind of skills that fit into every different area. And that's just personal preference in terms of language. That soft, I think, as I say, tends to imply a weakness, where squidgy tends to imply the idea that these are the kind of skills that will squeeze into any area where they've needed, as opposed to, the traditional hard skills. And just to wrap up, Phil's commented, agreed disadvantage is increased by remote learning, as is the stress on teachers who are teaching in the classroom and also dealing with the remote learning when they get home. What is the answer? Absolutely, Phil. I mean, that's one of the big issues that teachers are grappling with at the moment, because the pace of change has been so quick, and the need to sort of adapt has been, has been sort of a revolution in the way that we teach and the way that we learn. I think we have to not forget the people that are behind this, and the teachers that are giving up their time, and the huge amount of stress that's been put on so many people working in education, if they had to adapt to a completely new way of learning and working. And I do hope that message is received by Ofsted. I will have to stop now, but thank you for inviting me today, and for all those people who have been commenting into the chat box. I really appreciate it, and look forward to attending an event in person in the future. So thank you.